The snow fell quietly around the small wooden homestead, each flake catching the golden light that spilled from the cabin windows. Sarah knelt in the soft white powder beside her young daughter Emma, watching as the little girl carefully arranged twigs and stones into patterns only a child's imagination could understand. Behind them, the cabin stood warm and welcoming against the winter landscape. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney, carrying the scent of burning pine and the promise of hot soup waiting inside. The porch stretched across the front of the house, its wooden posts decorated with evergreen boughs that Sarah had gathered from the nearby forest just days before. Thomas stood near the cabin door, his weathered hands resting on his belt as he watched his wife and daughter play in the snow. His brown coat hung loose over his work clothes, and his hat sat at an angle that spoke of countless days spent outdoors. There was something peaceful about the way he observed them, as if this simple moment was worth more than all the gold in the mountains that surrounded their little valley. Emma looked up at her mother with bright eyes, her small hands red from the cold but still eager to continue her winter project. The blue dress she wore had been carefully sewn by Sarah's own hands, each stitch a labor of love during the long autumn evenings when the first frost began to paint the windows white. "Mama, look what I made," Emma said, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp air. She pointed to her creation in the snow, a careful arrangement that looked almost like a tiny village. Sarah smiled and brushed a strand of blonde hair from her face. Her own dress, a soft cream color, had seen many winters but was still her favorite for special occasions. Today felt special, though she couldn't quite say why. Perhaps it was the way the light fell across the snow, or the contentment she saw in Thomas's eyes, or simply the magic that seemed to hang in the air whenever the first real snow of the season arrived. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah said, leaning closer to admire Emma's handiwork. "Tell me about it." Emma's face lit up with the joy that only children possess when sharing their creations. "This is our house," she said, pointing to a larger pile of snow. "And this is the barn where Papa keeps the horses. And this," she paused dramatically, "is where the Christmas angel lives." Sarah felt a small tug in her chest. Christmas was still 3 weeks away, but already Emma had begun asking about presents and whether Santa would be able to find their remote homestead in the mountains. Money had been tight this year, tighter than usual, and Sarah knew there would be no store-bought toys under their small pine tree. Thomas had been working extra hours at the mill, coming home each evening with sawdust in his hair and worry lines around his eyes. The winter had come early and hard, making it difficult for supply wagons to reach their valley. What little money they had saved was needed for flour, coffee, and other necessities that would carry them through until spring. Sarah had been trying to think of ways to make Christmas special without spending money they didn't have. She could bake Emma's favorite cookies, and Thomas had promised to cut down a small tree from their own land. But every night when she tucked Emma into bed, the little girl would ask about her Christmas doll, the one she had been hoping for since last summer. "Mama," Emma said now, interrupting Sarah's thoughts, "do you think my Christmas angel knows about my doll?" Sarah's heart squeezed tight. She had been dreading this conversation for weeks. "What doll is that, sweetheart?" "The one with the yellow hair like yours, Mama. The one in the catalog that Mrs. Henderson showed me when we went to town." Emma's voice was filled with such hope that Sarah had to look away for a moment. She remembered that catalog, remembered how Emma had stared at the picture of the beautiful porcelain doll with its flowing blonde hair and delicate blue dress. The price had been more than they spent on groceries in a month, an impossible dream for a family like theirs. "We'll have to see what Christmas brings," Sarah said gently, the same answer she had been giving for weeks. It was the truth, but it felt hollow in her mouth. Thomas approached them then, his boots crunching softly in the snow. "Getting cold out here," he said, though his voice was warm. "Maybe it's time to head inside for some hot chocolate." Emma jumped up immediately, brushing snow from her dress. "Yes, Papa, and can you tell me the story about when you were little and got lost in the snow?" "I suppose I could do that," Thomas said, lifting Emma into his arms. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, already chattering about hot chocolate and stories and whether they might see deer outside the window tonight. Sarah rose more slowly, brushing snow from her skirts. As they walked toward the cabin, she noticed something tucked behind one of the porch posts that hadn't been there before. A small wooden crate, roughly made but sturdy, with her name carved into the lid in uneven letters. "Thomas," she said, stopping. "What is this?" Thomas set Emma down and looked at the crate as if seeing it for the first time. "Well, I'll be," he said, but there was something in his voice that made Sarah suspect he knew more than he was letting on. Emma ran to the crate immediately, her curiosity overwhelming any caution. "Can we open it, Mama?" Please. Sarah looked at Thomas, who shrugged with studied casualness. Might as well see what it is, he said. Could be anything. With careful hands, Sarah lifted the lid of the crate. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, lay the most beautiful doll she had ever seen. It wasn't the store-bought doll from the catalog, but something far more precious. The face had been carved from smooth wood and painted with delicate features. The blonde hair was made from corn silk, carefully braided and arranged. The dress was sewn from the same blue fabric as Emma's own dress, with tiny stitches that spoke of hours of patient work. Emma gasped and reached out with reverent hands. She's perfect, Mama, she's the most beautiful doll in the whole world. Sarah lifted the doll from the crate, marveling at the craftsmanship. Every detail had been lovingly attended to, from the small wooden shoes to the delicate embroidered flowers on the dress. This wasn't something that could be bought in any store. This was something made with love, made specifically for Emma. Thomas, Sarah said softly, how did you? Had some help, Thomas admitted, his cheeks reddening slightly. Mrs. Henderson mentioned that Emma had taken a fancy to that catalog doll. Said she thought she might be able to help with the sewing if someone could manage the carving. He cleared his throat. Been working on it in the evenings, after Emma went to bed. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. She thought of all those nights when Thomas had claimed to be checking on the animals, all those times he had seemed tired but satisfied when he came back inside. He had been giving up his rest, his few moments of leisure, to create this miracle for their daughter. And the hair? She asked, running her fingers through the silky blonde strands. Well, Thomas said, looking a bit embarrassed, I might have asked Mrs. Henderson to save some corn silk from her harvest. Said it reminded me of sunlight, like Emma's hair when she plays outside in the summer. Emma hugged the doll close to her chest, her face glowing with pure joy. What should I name her, Mama? Sarah looked at her husband, at this man who worked so hard and sacrificed so much for their little family. What do you think, sweetheart? What name feels right? Emma studied the doll's face carefully, as if the name were written there in the wooden features. Hope, she said finally. Her name is Hope. The word hung in the cold air like a blessing. Sarah reached for Thomas's hand, squeezing it tight as they watched their daughter cradle her new treasure. The snow continued to fall around them, soft and steady, blanketing their little homestead in white. Come on, Thomas said eventually, his voice a bit rough with emotion. Let's get inside where it's warm. We've got hot chocolate to make and stories to tell. As they walked into the cabin together, Emma chattering happily to her new doll, Sarah realized that Christmas had already arrived. It wasn't in the presents or the decorations or the special food they might share. It was in this moment, in the love that connected them, in the sacrifices they made for each other without counting the cost. The fire crackled in the hearth as they settled inside, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Emma sat cross-legged on the floor, introducing Hope to each of her other toys with serious ceremony. Thomas hung his coat on the peg by the door and began heating milk for hot chocolate. Sarah stood by the window for a moment, looking out at the snow-covered landscape that surrounded their home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own worries about money and weather and all the difficulties of frontier life. But tonight, in this warm cabin filled with love and laughter, they had everything they needed. The snow fell quietly outside, each flake a small blessing, each moment a gift. And in the golden light of the cabin, a little girl named Emma played with her doll named Hope, while her parents watched and remembered what it meant to be truly rich.